The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess is a game that many say tried to be Majora's Mask, but I have to disagree. I understand where these people come from, but Twilight Princess didn't necessarily copy Majora's Mask's scary feel like some say. Yes, it's got its creepy and disturbing moments, but overall the games have their own distinct feel. And Twilight Princess is a much more somber one. In my eyes, when I think of Majora's Mask, I think creepy. Skyward Sword usually makes me think hope, Breath of the Wild relaxing, and so on. All the Zelda games give me a particular feeling, and the best way I can describe the feeling Twilight Princess gives me is melancholic, as in a reflective sadness, not a severe case of depression, but rather like one of those moments when you're sad and not sure exactly why. Many elements of the game radiate with this melancholy. Given many of the major story elements, such as the laments of the spirits in Midna, it's no surprise that the game's story is rather depressing at times. But most of the game's music also feels sad and almost disconnected in a way. Tracks like Lake Hylia or Faron Woods aren't trying to imbue the player with a sense of happy relaxation like they are in their Skyward Sword variants. And Snow Peak's theme doesn't have the creepy tone that Snowhead does from Majora's Mask. Instead, most of Twilight Princess's OST just sounds slightly sad. Even Gerudo Valley, a fast-paced song you can't help but tap your feet to, got turned into a far more mellow track, fitting for the rather deserted area it plays in. Both the music and story make Twilight Princess a very distinctive game. However, more so than these two elements, I feel what really sells the feeling of sadness is the world you explore. It's not on the brink of collapse like Termina, but nevertheless, this iteration of Hyrule is one of sadness. Hyrule Castletown may be a bustling plaza, and Ordon Village is certainly a peaceful little starting area, but these, as well as all the other populated areas of the map, feel so disconnected from one another in the best way possible. The overworld is made small enough to where it can be traversed relatively quickly, and yet the distance between towns or settlements feels like miles. And that works in the game's benefit. Kakariko Village may only be a short ride away from the province of Ordon, and yet the areas feel so distant. With Hyrule Field being overrun with monsters, it's become a dangerous mission for villagers to travel the world. And so, in a way quite similar to our current quarantine, the people of Hyrule are locked within their own homes. And aside from a few special cases, not many characters mention other provinces, implying their lack of travel. The Zora of Lake Hylia seem to live secluded, disregarding the lives of the Gorons of Death Mountain, who pay no minds to the Hylians of Ordon, living their lives in the deep south, afraid of the growing terrors the rest of Hyrule faces. There's even the Hidden Village, which, despite at one time being fully populated, is now only known of by a select few. The spreading field of Twilight in the game helps to make the areas feel even more distant and sad. Its influence slowly spreads to each province, terrorizing their civilians. Seeing Koro cower in fear from the Twilight bugs in a small shed located in Faron Woods, as trivial a scene as it may seem, at least to me, really sold how big the world truly feels, and how distanced every area is also meant to feel. I want to take a look at every area specifically now, because they all feel lonely in some way. The game begins in Ordon Village, right at Link's house, which itself is actually placed in a different loading zone than the actual village, and is a little walk away from all the other houses. The village itself is a nice, homely little area with more than enough to keep you busy at the start of the game, but it's made clear as early as the very first cutscene with Russell that dangers lurk ahead. And the villagers, happy as they may be, are living in awareness that the Twilight could consume them at any moment. Heading away from the village, you're met with a massive series of branching paths in the woods of Faron, devoid of any civilians other than Koro. These paths lead anywhere from the sacred grove as deep into the forest as it gets, to the forest temple within a massive tree. These woods eventually also open up into Hyrule Field, the main area the player traverses to get from one place to another. Both Faron Woods and a decent portion of the rolling fields of Hyrule span the distance between Ordon and the settlement closest to it, Kakariko Village. It's a surprisingly large distance to travel, and the initial trek there is another instance of the game proving that its world and people are scattered. Kakariko itself is a pleasant little place, though less so than Ordon. Initially being ravaged by the Twilight on your first visit, the people of Kakariko are locked away in fear, and even when the village is saved, no one strays from it. Kakariko also contains one of the most important nods at the individual provinces being so disconnected, at least to me. Colin and the other kids end up at the village in the very beginning of the game despite living in Ordon, and Hyrule Field is deemed so dangerous that they don't travel back to their hometown until the end of the game when peace has been restored. This one event is just another instance showing how foreign of a concept traveling the world is to the people of Hyrule. Not far from Kakariko is Death Mountain, and yet despite the Goron tribe's previous peace with the people of Kakariko, when Link first approaches them, they react with hostility. While the conflict is eventually solved, the feud between the two neighboring races adds another sense of distance between the two areas, despite them physically being located side by side. Another area of the game is Hyrule Castletown, which is predictably located in the center of the map, not particularly close to any given area. The town is booming with civilians after it's freed from the Twilight, and while I can't find much to talk about for this one, it's still worth noting how certain NPCs' dialogue mention the state of the kingdom and the fears residing within the people. The next major area visited in the game is Lake Hylia. This one is another very peaceful place once freed from the Twilight, and yet also one that's isolated from the rest of the kingdom. The lake rests under the Bridge of Hylia, and the typical means by which to travel there are very arduous and far from ideal, hence why no one resides here other than two clowns. Yeah, literally. Lake Hylia rests at the bottom of Zora River, which follows a long winding path from Zora's domain, yet another very isolated area, populated by its own race, the Zora, who aren't really seen anywhere else. They, like most others, choose to confine themselves to their own land, afraid of the dangers threatening the world. The entire province of Hylia is one that's hard to travel through, and one that feels particularly distant from the rest. Branching away from the river of Hylia is the chilling mountain of Snow Peak. The entire area is masked by a thick storm of constant snow, and scaling to the mountain's peak only to sled down the other side makes you feel farther and farther from any form of life. The last character you see before you start the climb is Ashe, a Hylian girl scouting the area all alone. After that, it's you and the mountain. Nothing else aside from a few snow-white wolves. Snow Peak Ruins rests at the Peak Province's end, and here, at the edge of the world, two Yetis live alone. I think in terms of area design, this one is the best at selling how lonely Twilight Princess's world is. And the last major area in the game is another one that's vast and devoid of life. Gerudo Desert lies far from the rest of Hyrule. In fact, the only way to arrive here is by cannon. There's no traditional trail or climb you can do to meet the desert. The cracked earth of this massive wasteland stretches on for as far as the eye can see, and at the end of it lies a settlement of bokoblins, and beyond that, a prison, at the furthest point from Hyrule Castle. Its purpose? Confining the most dangerous of villains Hyrule has ever faced, as well as the Mirror of Twilight, a direct link between the Twilight Realm and Hyrule. I always found it strange how an area as pivotal as Arbiter's Grounds was placed here, but now seeing the dangers it holds, it makes perfect sense that it would be located as far from Hyrule Castle and Princess Zelda as possible. There's one final area I'd like to talk about that's far more isolated than all others, but sadly doesn't hold nearly as much of an impact simply due to its minor role in the story. The City in the Sky, home to a floating civilization known as the Uka, who live in complete isolation from the rest of Hyrule. Again, sadly, the city only serves as a dungeon, because if it had a larger role in the story, I guarantee I would have had a lot more to say about it. The world of Twilight Princess is laid out to perfectly complement the depressing state of Hyrule in the game's story. Each and every area feels different and distant from the one that came before it, and the fear within Hyrule is evident by the lack of diversity in towns, Unlike Breath of the Wild, where wandering travelers are plentiful, and Rito can be found with Gerudo, the people of Twilight Princess restrict themselves to their homes, afraid of the dangers that lie in this melancholic world. Except the postman, that guy will track you down to the ends of the fucking earth if he needs to.